My name is Abby. I'm a master's student at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio, studying instructional design and education methods. We'll be discussing the challenges facing students in traditional lecture-based classrooms and the impact of learner-centered teaching on retention of new concepts and ideas. There has been tremendous research over the past several years that illustrate the ways in which a brain learns and retains new material. These studies directly disagree with the traditional understanding of learning. Terry Doyle, author of Learner-Centered Teaching, Putting the Research on Learning into Practice, encourages educators to incorporate these methods through use of practice exams, rewrites of assignments, and student-led discussions with the goal of moving toward a learner-centered environment. There is a needed and valuable place for lecture in most every classroom, but Doyle suggests that lecture needs to be used sparingly and only with material that the students would struggle to learn on their own. Since the brain can only create new neurological pathways for material that it is actively pursuing, it's also logical that the idea of passive learning is a misconception. Engage your class in the lecture by making it more of a discussion. Pose a big idea question and gather responses from the group before moving on, or have the class work in smaller groups on specific pieces of a concept and present their findings back to the class. Students must be actively participating in their learning to create new neuron patterns within their brain and successfully learn the new material. Additionally, this new material must be repeated regularly for a period of time to cause any lasting neurological difference, according to Doyle. Additional information found in the studies urges teachers to carefully approach new material with students, specifically in standard lecture-based classrooms. We are conditioning our brains to better correlate to the fast-paced society that we live in, but in doing so, we are actually forcing our brains to work at less than their best. Take time with new ideas and concepts, focusing on one topic or idea at a time so that the brain does not get lost while navigating the new material. Continual overstimulation could also be creating the increasing diagnosis of children with attention deficit problems. The perceived focus issues could be caused by their brains struggling to deal with the lack of rest and downtime needed for them to have a chance to work through new concepts and build strong connections. Limit the distractions within the classroom and lead by example. Turn off your phone and close out of email so your full attention is on the lesson at hand. Encourage your students to make their personal learning space free of distractions by following the same steps. It is very easy to become distracted by every buzz from a cell phone or status update, and by creating expectations for the learning environment, we set the students up for their best success. Most people can explain their personal success with multitasking. There are some who easily admit their struggle with the concept, but others argue they multitask at least marginally well. This is a huge misconception in our society and one that has been written about in most studies of the brain. When we attempt to multitask, the neuron pathways in a brain get overloaded and new concepts can become linked to things that are completely unrelated. These faulty pathways can create frustration and rework for the student in the future. Students have been conditioned over the course of their previous education to expect the teacher to do the majority of the work in the classroom. Learner-centered teaching requires the student to take on a more active role in their education, and this can be met with resistance at first. Some of the easier ways that Doyle recommends to get a student to do the work are having them rewrite papers to incorporate feedback provided for additional points, give cumulative tests throughout the term focusing on the material that is most important for the students to retain after completing the course, and allowing students to retest for additional credit towards their score. Active participation requires trust from both the teacher and the student, but yields much stronger retention for students because they are more immersed in the new material. Another method Doyle discusses is scaffolding, or the building of new concepts on those previously learned to help students relate the new learning to what they already know. One of the most important aspects of scaffolding relies on the student working through the puzzle of relating the new with the old on their own. The impact that authentic learning activities have on a student's ability to learn new subjects supports the idea presented, and it directly impacts the way in which a brain creates neural pathways for newly learned material. When students are able to actively engage in real-world learning about various topics, they are creating those lasting pathways and further developing their critical thinking abilities. By mimicking a real experience, students feel more connected to the subject they are learning and to the professional environment they are learning from. This doesn't require that all authentic activities take place in the field, though. Doyle argues that a student can get similar hands-on experience with the subject matter in the classroom through the use of multimedia and internet sources. Participation with these types of projects require students to actively approach the material and draw on their understanding of their environment to solve the problems presented, which fosters better retention and cognition over the course of their education. The best support for converting to learner-centered methods comes from the outcomes-based research that is quickly becoming more available. As additional studies are done about the impact of teaching students to think of themselves as lifelong learners and encouraging them to take more control of their education, the easier it should be for additional teachers to support these methods. And while, as Doyle states, it's always difficult to be one of the first to embrace something new, the research is already available to support the move toward learner-centered teaching methods.